Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Do your vows together. Om Namo Nanju Shriye, Namo Shu Shriye, Namo Shriye, Om Namo Nanju Shriye, Namo Shu Shriye, Namo this morning, as many of you know, since you have into the center, that's the way we usually begin every sort of, whether we're doing a guided meditation or a course or whatever, we set our motivation. But let's just sit for a moment. We've been driving through the snow and the weather to get here, so just calming our minds by focusing on the breath for just a few minutes. Just the sensations of breathing in the body, wherever the sensations are most apparent. It might be in the area of the abdomen, the diaphragm expanding and contracting, or the lungs expanding and contracting, or perhaps the subtlest area is the area around the nostrils, feeling the air going in and out of the nostrils. So just trying to focus there for a few minutes. This helps to settle the mind. And then let's take a moment, just reflect on your motivation for coming today. It may be that you're a brand new student of Buddhism, just starting out. Perhaps you've heard that Buddhism has something to offer in terms of dealing with our unsatisfactory experiences in life. Perhaps you've been going through a difficult, challenging time. You're looking for some sort of new perspectives, maybe some solutions to what you've been going through. Perhaps you've been studying for some time and you're looking to deepen your understanding of the topics of karma and emptiness. And perhaps you're quite an experienced student, and again, just looking for a refresher, a different perspective, some more opportunity to deepen your understanding. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just helpful to reflect on our intention and set our motivation for our time together today. We say in Buddhism we get the most out of it if we go into every practice opportunity with a very clear intention. So take a moment to
to reflect on your motivation. And in our tradition, we say that all of our practice, all of our learning, all of our meditation is done ultimately to develop our capacity to be of benefit to others. So we're developing ourselves personally and spiritually. We put energy into our own practice, but ultimately the goal is to be of ultimate benefit to other beings by developing our qualities, our wisdom, our compassion, our ability. This is known as bodhicitta, this wish for full enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So just try to set, as much as possible, an altruistic intention for our time together this weekend. Okay, so thank you all for coming, braving the weather and the roads and the snowbanks and all that you have to do. I'm still so impressed by people who live in these kind of climates. It's extreme. I've been living in Canada, but not long enough to really get used to it. So, okay, so this weekend we are going to explore nothing less than Lord Buddha's explanation for how we create our reality. Okay, maybe a little bit of a intimidating topic to try to explore in 2 short days, but we're going to do our best. So this is one of the really unique presentations of Lord Buddha, is how does our reality exist? How do we create our reality? There's many explanations for existence in the different spiritual traditions. There are 2 main themes that were very common in ancient India at the time of Lord Buddha that I think are also kind of common actually in 21st century North America. Same sort of themes. And one theme is there's some creator being, right? A sort of omnipotent creator like God, and there was that idea in ancient India as well, that the universe was created by some omnipotent creator being. And then there was another idea that was also common in ancient India that I think is common now, that things are kind of random, right? Things just sort of happen. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. So our approach is just to sort of try to cope with this sort of random, circumstance. We're just sort of a helpless victim. And so our approach is just to try and kind of develop as many coping mechanisms as possible, because it's all just kind of chaotic and unpredictable, right? So in the first approach, we're trying to sometimes appease, supplicate, some supreme being for mercy or whatever. Second approach is not much we can do, just deal with it, right? So Lord Buddha had a really different approach. He said, we actually create our reality through our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. We actually create the universe that we inhabit and experience. So it gives us a tremendous amount of, on the one hand, responsibility, right? And some of you were here last night, and I said it's kind of a drag about Buddhism. It's really all up to us. It's not praying for mercy to some savior, So it's a tremendous amount of responsibility and a tremendous amount of opportunity. That's kind of the other side of the coin, is in that responsibility, we can actually change our reality through our body, speech, and mind, our actions of body, speech, and mind. So like I said, kind of a daunting task for this weekend to go through, how do we do that? You know, how do we change our reality? Because that's really the promise of Buddhism is, yeah, it's not just about coping with it. You know, suffering stress-free and, you know, mindfully, but you still have to go through it all. Buddhism says, no, actually the promise is a complete cessation of all unwanted experiences, everything from a momentary bad mood to an entire rebirth filled with unwanted experiences. And this is really the vision of Buddhism. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about sometimes to make things maybe more palatable to the sort of Western scientific materialistic mind, Buddhism is, you know, sometimes presented in sort of a watered down way, right? It's sort of like, oh, it's kind of too much. It's maybe too extreme to talk about things like rebirth and we create our reality. Let's just talk about mindfully suffering. You know, that's a little bit more palatable. And I was telling this person, I was like, no, that's never my approach. Because that wasn't what the Buddha taught. The Four Noble Truths, very clear, right? There's the truth of dissatisfaction is kind of a better translation of that. We'll talk about what that means. The truth of the cause, right, which is mostly what we're going to be talking about this weekend. But then the good news, you know, if there were just two noble truths, this religion would not have lasted 2,600 years. It would just be kind of depressing. Oh, there's suffering and a cause. Wah, wah, you know, that's it, folks. There's the truth of cessation of all unwanted experiences, and then the path leading to that, right? So that's the promise of Buddhism. Sometimes we're given a bad rap. Oh, you Buddhists are always talking about suffering. You're so pessimistic. It's like, no, we're just trying to wake up to our, you know, the reality of our existence, but there's an answer to it. So that's what we're going to be talking about this weekend is how are those unwanted experiences caused that we all experience? Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this room. If you were liberated, you'd just be off enjoying your freedom from suffering. You know, I can only presume that you're in this room because, like me, you're still experiencing what the Buddha talked about. Getting what you don't want. Not getting what you want. You get what you want and you lose it. And this is my favorite, like, it's because it's so painful, is you get what you thought you wanted and it's disappointing. Don't you love that one? Yeah. You put so much energy into getting the thing that you thought was going to make you happy, and you get it and you're like, that's it? That's all? I often think we're fooled by anticipation. To me, this is our biggest enemy, right? You're fooled into thinking that that thing that you think you want gives you happiness by the anticipation that you feel before you get it. That excitement, because it's usually that you're like, yeah, I'm gonna get it. You know, you meet the new cute person and you're going after them and you're all excited and you're like, yeah, we're gonna go out and it's gonna be great. And then usually, I mean, maybe that lasts even the first kind of 2 weeks that you're going out. After about 6 months, max, don't things change? Like, come on, it's never quite as exciting. Any of those sense pleasures is when you get it. I think we're fooled by that anticipation into thinking the thing made us happy. I mean, I think everybody can kind of relate to that, isn't it? I mean, like somebody said last night, everybody in the room is over the age of 15, you know, and it's sort of a little age dependent, I think, too. The more experience we've had in disappointment, the more people are nodding their heads. Oh, yeah, been there, done that, have the scars to prove it. We all know that cycle. So that's what the Buddha was really talking about, is that, you know. Sometimes we talk about the truth of suffering, but suffering is kind of an extreme word that the actual word in Sanskrit, dukkha, means something more like, I mean, literally it means things are out of kilter. You know, things don't quite go the way we want them to. That's the etymology of this word dukkha. It means literally out of kilter wheel. And I think any of us, have you had the grocery cart at the Safeway with the wonky wheel? You know? And you're just trying to steer it towards the broccoli and you keep slamming into the frozen foods. And that's what our life is like, isn't it? It's like, it's so clear, I'm just going there. Why won't my life steer in that direction? And that's what the Buddha was really talking about. It was like the wonky wheelness of our life. You know, we can substitute that for the truth of suffering, the truth of the wonky Safeway grocery cart wheel thing. We can never quite steer it. We just can't get it right. Or you get it right for a little while, and then it's this delicately balanced house of cards, isn't it? You're with the partner of your dreams, your high school sweetheart, you know, the grandchildren are behaving, the roof doesn't leak, the job is good, the 401k plan has not tanked yet due to the global financial crisis, and then somebody dies. Because it's going to happen. I mean, that's the eventual outcome that we're all facing, right? It's all going to fall apart eventually. The house of cards will never stay completely balanced. But the good news is, because you're all ready to go home now, you're like, she's a drag. What am I doing sitting here? The good news is there is an answer to that. That is preventable, removable, because it's caused. And that's what we're going to be talking about this weekend, because it's very cool, actually, and very practical. You were saying last night, thank you for being practical, right? Nothing that the Buddha taught is empty theory. It's all applicable to our lives, very, very practical. So we're going to look at how do we change our reality this weekend. The two main things that we're going to be looking at, two very often extremely misunderstood topics. Karma, the topic of karma, and the topic of emptiness. Hugely misunderstood in Buddhism. Very much relate to each other and kind of work together to create our reality. And we can learn tools to manipulate is kind of a word with a bad connotation, but in a good way, right? We can actually work with these processes to create the reality that we want, you know, and that is really what the Buddha was talking about when he presented the Four Noble Truths. So today, what we're going to be looking at a lot is how karma works. I know some of you have studied karma, some of you are new, not sure the background of everybody in the class, so we're going to be looking at the mechanics of karma. How does karma actually work? Then we're going to be looking at a presentation that's unique to Buddhism. And according to a lot of the stories, this was the big epiphany that Lord Buddha had under the Bodhi tree. And it's called the 12 Links of Dependent Origination. And it's showing how we create our experience, step by step by step. And this is very unique to Buddhism, is this sort of a presentation of how we create our reality. And then we'll look at that in terms of, okay, where are some of these choice points where things can change, right? Because we're not a helpless victim of circumstance in Buddhism at all. We are creating this step by step by step, and by understanding those steps, we can change things. And then we're going to look at the concept of emptiness, also, you know, often very misunderstood, and apply that concept to this 12 links of dependent origination. So tall order before 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. But we'll do our best. And I know for some of you, these are really new concepts. Don't get overwhelmed. If, you know, I'm not expecting you to understand absolutely everything about the concepts. You will be exposed to these ideas over and over and over again. There always has to be a first time, right? And you might understand 5 or 10% of the whole presentation, but you will, you know, encounter these ideas again, and because of having a little bit of explanation, the next time you'll get more. I always think with Buddhism, it's sort of like, it's really one basic outline called the Four Noble Truths. It's not like you learn a whole nother advanced kind of paradigm. And then the more you study, you're just filling in kind of more detail of the outline, right? It's not like some whole new, oh, this is the beginning thing, and then later throw out the Four Noble Truths and there's a whole nother story. It's just really one story. So the more you study, it's just more of the kind of filling in, you know, those outlines, and it's like Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, capital A, B, C, you know, you get down to all the little letters, you know, eventually. So this is kind of the big outline. Yeah, so it's a lot of detail. You have this booklet. Hopefully, did everybody get one of these when you came in? And it has a lot of the notes that I'll be presenting on this chart. This is yours to keep. Feel free to also, you know, take additional notes in this, and then you can review, you know, for just being able to kind of go over it. It's so easy to come to these teachings and you're sitting there and you're kind of trying to take it all in, and then you go home and you're like, oh, wow, what did she say? It was kind of vague and I'm not sure the points. You know, I really like the lists and the charts and the things. So I do that for you, you know, because this is my thing. So here you are with the lists and the charts, because that's kind of the way we learn in the West. In the Tibetan monastic system, they debate for hours every day and memorize. And we kind of don't do that in, you know, our educational system. We got the charts and the handouts and the homework and the quizzes and stuff. Later on today, we're going to take a karma quiz, which will not be graded. It's just to show you, what are you doing to create your experiences? And that's very, very cool, because there's, you know, in Buddhist scripture, there are these correlations between our actions and the results that we're experiencing. And in order to get an insight into that, we're actually going to be looking at, what are we experiencing? What's the cause of those experiences, so that we can quit creating the cause. If we don't want to be having those experiences, easy. Quit creating the cause. You don't have to do any kind of magical formula. Just stop creating the cause. Easier said than done, granted, right? But by understanding the correlations, like I said, then we can really work these concepts to change our reality, okay? So that's kind of the overview of what we're going to be talking about. As I said, today we're going to be focusing mostly on karma and how karma works, just to kind of provide a framework. The teachings on karma that we focus on come from a text called the Abhidharma Kosha, which usually translates as something like treasury of higher knowledge or treasury of manifest knowledge. It's by a master called Master Vasubandhu, who lived around 350 AD. And some of you who've been studying might also be familiar with another master called Master Asanga. Master Vasubandhu and Master Asanga were half-brothers, and they're responsible for most of the root texts that are studied in the Tibetan tradition. So without brothers, what would we study, right? They were amazing, you know, wrote all of these texts. This treasury of higher knowledge, the Abhidharma itself is one of the three, what we call the three baskets of the scriptural collections of Buddhism. We talk about the Sutra basket, which was the discourses of Lord Buddha, right? So that was when Lord Buddha was either speaking to a gathering or speaking one-on-one to someone who had come to ask a question. So that's the Sutra collection of discourses. Then we have the Vinaya, or the ethical discipline scriptures, and then we have the Abhidharma. So that's this manifest knowledge or higher knowledge. Within that are explanations on Buddhist psychology, how the mind works. Last night, for those of you that were here, we were talking about these mental afflictions or disturbing emotions. All of those lists are found in the Abhidharma, in this collection of scriptures. Also, the explanation of Buddhist cosmology is a very interesting explanation of how the universe is created in these cycles of existence. All of that is found in the Abhidharma. And also the explanations of karma found there. And then in this book that Master Vasubandhu kind of took all of that collection of scriptures sort of condensed them. That's why it's called the treasury of the Abhidharma, right? The treasury of this collection. He sort of summarized, categorized all of those scriptures into kind of systematic presentation. And the fourth chapter of that book by Master Vasubandhu contains all of the teachings on karma that we're going to be, that's kind of the source of what we're going to be talking about today. And the first stanza of the chapter of the Abhidharma Koshu begins with this verse. Actually, there's a line that isn't on this flip chart. It says, all of the worlds of the universe are created by karma. So it's basically saying karma is what creates things. It's not a creator God, and it ain't random. It's actually karma, right? And then Master Vasubandhu says, karma is intention and what it produces. Intention is mental karma. What it gives rise to is karma of body and of speech. So this is kind of the basic definition. By the way, the word karma is a Sanskrit word that literally translates as action. That's all that it means, right? Karma just means action. So Master Vasubandhu is saying its rawest, most basic form is just a mental intention, a movement of mind, right? Your mind, which is why we're so big on setting our motivation, right? Which we just did, and we do at the beginning of every practice. Our teachers, the Tibetan Lamas, say, really good when you wake up in the morning, even if you don't do any other formal practice, at least try and set your motivation for the day. May I be somehow of benefit to others. May I not engage in negative actions. Setting that intention, very powerful, right? And that's kind of the rawest, most basic form of karma is this intention, this mental karma, and it gives rise to actions. We can translate that here of body and of speech. So everything begins with the thought, the intention, the motivation, gives rise to your speech and your physical actions. So sometimes we differentiate and we talk about motivating karma and motivated karma. So the motivating is the mental, right? That intention, and then it motivates. The motivated karma is the body and speech. And this is a little bit different, isn't it, from sometimes the sort of maybe popular sort of new age idea of the word karma. I heard now that karma has made it into the Oxford English Dictionary, which means it's really an English word now, right? If it makes it into the OED. But it's very interesting because the definition, I think I looked it up on the internet once, of, the definition of karma is not this, right? It's this idea of fate or destiny, and it more is looking at the result rather than the action that creates the cause. Karma is the cause. Then we can talk about the result of karma. But you'll be walking down the street with a friend and you'll pass a homeless person, for example. I mean, there's lots of them in California where I'm from because the weather's nice. Maybe not as many out here. And you'll be passing somebody and you want to help or stop or whatever, and your friend will be like, oh, it's their karma. Like there's nothing you can do. Definitely not at all the Buddhist idea of karma, that it's something like your etched in stone fate or destiny. It's not the result, it's the cause, because it's the action of mental, verbal, or physical that creates a seed. Sometimes we talk about karma. We use these agricultural analogies because let's face it was 2,600 years ago in agrarian ancient India. So there's full of, these but it's sort of a good metaphor, right? A seed is planted in your mind stream. I always think of a conveyor belt and sort of like chocolate chip chocolate chips or something, embedded in this mind stream. So karma refers to that imprint, that seed, being imprinted into your mind. Then later on, when it meets with the right conditions, that seed will manifest into an experience for you, into a result, right? That's kind of the fruition of karma, the ripening of that karmic seed. But karma itself more refers to that seed being planted in your mind rather than the result of it, right? So it's really quite different from that, I don't know, kind of new agey sort of popular culture idea of karma being like your fate, right? And that is, even though Lord Buddha talked about karma, and you find the sort of ideas of karma in ancient Indian philosophical systems, the way the Buddha explained karma is quite different, right? In some of those ancient Indian other philosophical systems, karma is explained more as fate or destiny. And in India, even now in the 21st century, it's changing a bit, but not a whole lot. If you're born into a certain caste, you have your predetermined, job description, and there ain't a lot of leeway. And that's just seen as your karma to be born into there's the halvalis, like the candy maker caste. And maybe you can work in a chai shop and not make halva, but pretty much you're restricted. You can cook, basically what that means. Like I said, there's a little bit of leeway, a little bit now, but still very much that idea that, hey, that's your fate. That's your karma, that's your destiny, to be like that. Not the Buddhist view. Because karma is dynamic. We're always creating new causes. According to the lowest Buddhist philosophical system, 65 moments per finger snap. According to a higher one, something like 364, opportunities per second. We're laying down new karmic imprints all the time, burning through the past ones, laying down new ones all the time. So there's this incredible opportunity for transformation. It's kind of daunting, isn't it? 365 for, oh my God, what am I doing with my mind? Every finger snap, this is the opportunity that we have. But it's awesome. And it shows how we can completely transform our life because we're laying down new karma all the time, right? I think these beings with a direct perception of karma, like our teacher Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he has this thing that he tries to get us to create virtue with every single action. And there's a list in the back of some of these prayer books some of you have seen, right? He's like, open a door. Think of opening the door to the upper realms for all sentient beings. Walk up the stairs. Think of leading all beings to enlightenment. Have a poo. Think about, purifying. Every single thing. Because he gets that thing of the opportunity that we have. The only time that we're creating any virtue is with our pathetic 15-minute morning meditation, speaking for myself. We're wasting unbelievable opportunity, right? So that's a person who really understands the chances that we have for laying down those virtuous imprints. It's unbelievable. It gives us a vision. For me, I'm really overwhelmed by those lists. It's like, I just feel like, oh my God. I try and work with 1 or 2 a day. That's kind of all I can handle. But then it gets you into the habit, right? With that action that we have to do every day. We have to eat. We have to open the door. We have to go up the stairs. If we can link that with some sort of a virtuous thought, at least, then, right, we're making the most of our 24/7. And so that's, with beings with this kind of mindset, they're giving us this opportunity and really encouraging. And it's all because of this. Because this is creating our reality. The first line is, all the world that you experience is created by this stuff. and you can do something about it. You don't like the experiences you're having? Join the club. You can do something about it. It's not just fate or destiny. And that's really what we're going to be talking about this weekend. So it's very cool, very practical, theoretical and philosophical and really practical. It's like, this is where the rubber meets the road. You want to change your life? We're going to look at exactly how to do that very practically. The karma quiz thing, you're going to like that. I'm not going to see it. Yeah, so any questions?
So when it's supposed to snow on Monday, when we're shoveling, we study.
In the clearing path, we're all sending.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's nice to look at that list of Lama Zopa. We can get kind of into the groove and then make up your own virtuous motivations. We have to be doing this stuff. We have to work. We have to live. When we were in, I remember in Kopan Monastery when I was first studying Buddhism, and one of our teachers, Lama Lundrup, the former abbot of Kopan who's recently passed away, everybody is taking their intro Buddhist class, and then they start freaking out because they have to go back home, and have their ordinary life, and they're like, how do I keep this stuff in mind? And he was going, you work as a clerk in the grocery store. You have to give people their change from their purchase. He goes, just imagine giving them an offering every time you give them and he said, don't get into this thing of, it's really their money, and he said, forget about that. Just transform your mind. Forget about the logical thing of, it's really their money. Anyway, he just said, transform it all. It was so cool, right? Because, like I said last night, I'm really lucky. I get to be a nun and teach Dharma all the time, but that's very rare to be able to really, and still I waste, believe you me. I don't make the most of every moment, but we all have to live. We have to do stuff. You have to shovel the walk. Can we transform it all, right? Because this is the most basic kind of raw thing, is what's going on in our mind all the time. Yeah. Any other questions before we move on? Yeah, what's your name?
My name is Raysel.
Raysel, nice to meet you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too. You mentioned that, kind of the dissatisfaction of getting what you want and it being like, oh, well, that was it?
Yeah.
Well, how about Buddhism? How do I know that I'm not just turning Buddhism into that same thing? I think that this is a really good thing.
Yeah.
And, well, what if I get it? And it's like, well, that's it.
Right.
Is the right way to view it, not on faith, but rather through example, looking at the monks and seeing where they are and being like, okay, well, look at what they got to and how they feel and how they react to the world. That's what Buddhism brings. So that's my evidence.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because in Buddhism, unlike some other faith traditions, not to diss any other tradition, because that's uncool too, but blind faith is not a thing in Buddhism at all. In fact, the Buddha said, you check with your own experience. And that's one of the things when I first started studying Buddhism, the Buddha's explanation of the dissatisfaction of my life was the truest explanation of what I was going through that I'd ever come across, right? So there's plenty of things that we can check for ourselves in Buddhism with our own experience, like that. To me, the Four Noble Truths thing totally made sense. Even though I don't know enlightenment exists for sure, I don't know that there's future lives, but what he said about how I my reality, right on, right? And then the second part also was true for me. And when I met His Holiness the Dalai Lama for the first time, that was a huge turning point, because I was like, I've never met anybody that feels like this. Something's going on here. I have no clairvoyance. I don't know his mind, but whoa. I'm from California. I know about energy, And when I met him, I was just like blown away by what I was experiencing in that moment. And actually, I went into it really skeptical, so I wasn't doing this groupie thing of imputing, I don't think. In fact, I was very skeptical. I'm like, okay, yeah, who's this guy? Let's see. And I'm standing in front of him in this incredible energy of compassion and strength and power and intelligence and this whole package. So yeah, there's that too. You observe the practitioners, and I think, okay, that's what convinced me, because I said, okay, if this spiritual path is producing a being like that, I'm going to check it out and see what's going on. You know, it's producing these beings that, like I say, I don't know for sure what is going on, but you can, you can feel what I felt. And Helena was talking last night about ego, and what's the kind of the role of ego in all of this. And when I think of my teachers like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it's the most palpable thing that you experience a total lack of ego, right? You're around this person that's so powerful, that's so engaged, that's doing all this stuff. There's not even a whiff of it's about me. And you can just feel it. And it's so kind of palpable in its absence. It's mind-blowing, because you've never met somebody that just doesn't have it's about me anywhere on the radar. And you're just checking and you're like, whoa, it's not there at all, like ever, for even a second. And that's the convincing part, in addition to what I can check myself with my own experience. But like I said, I can't really check a high level of realization because I'm not there yet, but you can feel it, the energy. And so, yeah, that's what it is, I think, in Buddhism. That's what sold me as a kind of a skeptical person, but seeking, right, but not easy, no pushover. I've been around the block, I wasn't going to be convinced by just anybody. But yeah, that's what convinced me. And then the more you experience the path, you realize it works, even in the short term. It's sort of incrementally you suffer less and less and less. It's not like some big jump between, oh, you're just kind of pathetic and miserable, and then, next Tuesday you're enlightened. It's sort of like your practices really work to reduce your suffering along the way, so you can see the evidence of how it works in your own life too, and that part's cool. Yeah, great question. And then you had something to say.
Some Buddhist groups stress that you can't do anything really in the present moment except create good karma for the future. In other words, what you're experiencing is a result of your past motivations and actions.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's this really pesky lag period with karma that can really throw us off. John Lennon was wrong. The instant karma thing, it's not like that, right? There is always a lag period between the cause and the result. Right? So we can't always, in fact, they say only an enlightened being can see exactly which result was created by exactly which cause. We can see correlations in general, but exactly which action in some past life led to your delicious smoothie yesterday. Only a Buddha can see that. But we can sort of logically figure out the general correlations. But there's always a lag period. So sometimes you get thrown off when you kind of get introduced to karma, not necessarily the whole picture. Because, you sit down and you make a big donation to your favorite nonprofit on the internet, and you're feeling so good, and it's so easy now. You just do it through PayPal. You don't even remember you used to have to write a check, put it in the envelope, do this thing. Then you stand up and trip and stub your toe, and you're like, oh, why did that happen? I just did something really good. Why? The stubbing your toe was not the result of the big donation. So there's these sort of like overlapping. The stubbing your toe was created by some other cause. The big donation will actually create the cause for you to experience abundance in the future. But there's these weird sort of overlapping. So just because something is temporally in juxtaposition does not mean it has a relationship of cause and effect. Yeah, good point. We'll look at that. Yeah.
However, there is the obvious cause and effect of, I'm a gardener, right? So if I create the conditions for a seed to grow, it'll grow.
Yeah.
Likewise, you could have stubbed your toe because you weren't looking where you were going.
Yeah.
So So how do you?
And we'll look at that.
Oh.
We'll look at
okay.
that. We'll look at that. But you don't plant the seed today and get the sprout tomorrow. Right? So you're creating a cause, and it's the same thing with karma. And in fact, one of my friends says, the way we try to deal with our reality, he says, he uses this word roboclaws. You know those machines that are in the pizza? They're always in like a pizza place with the stuffed animal, and it's got the claw coming down, and you push the button to try and grab the... He says, the way we try and deal with our momentary reality is like that. Something's happening that we don't want. We're trying to kind of roboclaws and manipulate. He says, forget it. Because as Jenny said, that's a ripening of a cause that was created in the past. Once it's in the process of ripening, ain't a whole lot we can do about it. So our approach to karma should be gardening, right? Exactly like gardening. Planting the seeds now for experiences that we're going to have in the future. But we'll look at that when we look more at kind of the details of the mechanism of karma. Yeah.
I think it also speaks to that, the quote of like, the stubbing of the toe is the action of the body. The mind is the one that wasn't paying attention that caused me to stub my, so like, the karma that caused me not to pay attention is the, right?
We would say that not paying attention is a condition, right? The experience of stubbing the toe is a fruition of a past karmic seed, and then the condition that causes that to ripen in that moment as a stubbed toe is mindlessness, heedlessness. Yeah. But we'll look at that. The difference between causes and conditions, because they're both needed for that karmic seed
So it's kind
to ripen.
It's easier to see the
condition, because that's the need.
Totally,
You can see that, but
exactly.
It's really hard to
And
attack the cause.
we often mistake the
condition for
how for the why.
Yeah.
We think that the how it happened is the why it happened. The why it happened is karma. The how it happened is I was spacing out in that moment, right? So we confuse how and why. We'll look
I
at
won
that.
lottery because I bought a ticket.
Yeah.
The ticket was the condition.
Condition.
The
Yeah.
cause was that in previous life I was really generous. and
That's
now
right.
I'm
Absolutely, right? So we'll look at that because that's a really fundamental misunderstanding we have is we think that the how is the why. We think the condition is the cause. We think the aspirin made our headache go away. Why does aspirin not always work to relieve our headache? Because it ain't the why, it's the how. If we have the karma for the headache to go away, the aspirin will work as a condition, right? So it gets really interesting. Gets very interesting, this thing. But I'm going to reel myself back in. So let's look at the Four Noble Truths a little bit. And we've been talking about this a little bit. This is very cool, right? I start just about every teaching that I ever give with this diagram, which is showing the relationship between the first two noble truths, the truth of suffering, which the Buddha started out with, even though this isn't the first in terms of causation, right? So in terms of the cause, this isn't the first, but it's the first in terms of we need to understand this. We need to accept this before we're going to look deeper at the cause. We need to agree with what the Buddha said. And like I said, this word suffering, I don't prefer that. I'm using it on the flip chart because we're a little stuck with it, right? You always hear the truth of suffering, but a lot of translators prefer to translate this word dukkha, which I said means something like constricted or out of kilter. It's a word in Sanskrit that has kind of two elements. Akka literally means space, right? But it can refer to the hole in the middle of the wheel that the axle goes through. So that's why I say out of kilter wheel is literally what dukkha means. Some people say constricted space, right? And I think of that in terms of we're trying to kind of shove all of reality into this little tiny idea that we have of what happiness looks like, which is so constricted Remember, those of you my age might remember the Play-Doh extruders. We're shoving, I always broke mine because my Play-Doh would dry out and I'd break the handle because I was like, we're trying to shove reality through this tiny little, very constricted kind of vision that we have, right? So think of that when you think of this word dukkha, because that's what the Buddha was saying about our experience is, like I said, things don't always go right. That grocery wheel is out of whack. And we can't steer our life in the direction that we want it to go in, you know? Or maybe, like I said, we get it to go that way temporarily. But that's almost worse, isn't it? Because then there's that anxiety of like, when's it going to fall apart? I know it's going to happen. It's all sweet right now, but oh boy, I know, you know? So it's almost worse when it's going well, because you just know it's going to fall apart. That's what the Buddha was talking about, right? And so that's what this means, the truth of suffering. So some translators prefer dissatisfaction, which is better.
Yeah.
You know, if we're going to choose one English word, because we don't want to have to like do the whole etymology and the wonky wheel thing, dissatisfaction is pretty good. One translator who I love his translations, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, this Western monk in the Thai forest tradition, he calls it stress. I don't like that so much because that makes it feel like it's being stressed out, you know. So he uses stress. Dissatisfaction is good. We're kind of stuck with suffering in a lot of the books. And then the truth of the origin of suffering. So how is this caused? Because the more we understand the causation, the more we can understand how we break through, how we eliminate the causes, right? So this is why the Buddha started with this. Before he started talking about the path, he had to explain in a lot of detail how we get into that mess of dissatisfaction. That's the reason we're sitting in this room right now, isn't it? So we talk about this kind of chain reaction of causation, starting with ignorance. And this shows up at the top of every list, right, in Buddhism, is ignorance. When we look at the 12 links, ignorance shows up as the first link. So what kind of ignorance is this, do you think? Is it just like when I'm really kind of into birds and bird watching. And so when I first started living in New Zealand, which broke off from Gondwana, like there's these weirdo birds I've never seen in my life. So I was like, what the heck is that? That's a certain kind of ignorance. Is that what we're talking about here? No. So what kind of ignorance?
Ignorance of how things really exist.
Yeah. So the ignorance about the ultimate nature of reality. Okay, long story. We'll get into that in a lot of detail tomorrow, right? But just the kind of short answer right now is there's a huge dichotomy in Buddhism between the way things appear and the way they exist. We don't realize that. We think that things exist in exactly the way they appear to us. That's what the root ignorance that's the cause of all the problems is. Buddhism says there's this huge gap between the way things appear and the way they exist, and we're ignorant about the fact, sometimes we're just completely ignorant about the fact there is such a gap. We completely believe, or even if we know about the gap theoretically, we don't act on it the minute we're outside of this room. We're not acting on that gap, are we? We're like, no, it's like that. How dare you? How? You know, and then all of the disturbing emotions arise as a result of that, right? So that huge gap, long story, we'll get into it tomorrow, but that's kind of the basis of it. So actually, the goal of Buddhism is to reduce and eventually actually completely eliminate that gap so that the reality and our perception of that reality completely coincide, okay? So that's wisdom in Buddhism, you know. It's a certain kind of intellectual wisdom that at least understands there's a gap. And then we said at a certain point we actually have a direct perception of the ultimate nature of reality, which we'll talk about tomorrow. There's another kind of ignorance that also is related to that fits into this category of ignorance too. Anybody else have an idea of what kind of ignorance that would be?
View.
What kind of wrong
Believing a non-Buddhist philosophy.
view? Yeah, in terms of...
Or misunderstanding of what is the Buddha was trying to teach.
Yeah. In terms of what specifically, in addition to that nature of reality? There's another aspect that's included in there when we talk about this root ignorance.
Either no existence or permanence, impermanence.
Yeah, not that. What I'm looking for is ignorance about, cause and effect, right? Ignorance about cause and effect. So ignorance about the ultimate nature of reality, and the ignorance that says there is no relationship between cause and effect, right? Because like either everything's random or everything's created by a creator being, right? Those wrong views specifically, right? Because obviously, without understanding cause and effect, we're never going to be able to actually practice the path, which is kind of predicated upon an understanding of cause leads to result. Otherwise, why bother practicing ethics, meditation, any of it? If everything's random, sex, drugs, rock and roll just to have a good time, because there's nothing you can do about it, right? So that really undermines the path. So the ignorance about the nature of reality and the ignorance about just the law of cause and effect, right? Otherwise kind of known as karma, then leads to mental afflictions. We were talking about this for those of you here last night, right? We talked about this. The Sanskrit word is klesha, right? I think in your booklet, I was using disturbing emotions as the translation for this word. I'm not using that so much anymore. Sorry, that's an old copy. Mental affliction is better. And who from last night remembers the definition of a mental affliction? What's the very basic definition? Anybody remember?
Disturbs your peace of mind.
Thank you. A mental event that disturbs your peace of mind. Okay? So like I was saying last night, the Western word emotion has a lot of other kind of connotations along with it, but this in Buddhism is seen as any kind of a mental event, any thought that's disturbing to our peace of mind. And the main flavors are attachment and aversion. And then there's a list of 26 of these in the text on Buddhist philosophy. We talk about the three poisons: ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And in this list of 26, it's like a recipe, some combination of those three basic ones: ignorance, attachment, and aversion. For example, jealousy. 2 parts attachment, 1 part aversion, and a healthy sprinkling of ignorance. It's actually like laid out like that in the Buddhist philosophical text. So we talked about attachment and aversion a little bit last night. What was the definition of attachment? Anybody remember some of the components of that definition? Again, I know not everybody was here last night, so we'll review. Yes?
Something you can't exist without. Your happiness completely depends on this thing.
And how does it relate to ignorance?
Nothing outside of yourself can bring you happiness.
Yeah, and we're also misperceiving that very object, right? And that's where that dichotomy between the way things exist and the way they appear. We're believing in that appearance of 100% attractive, the new boyfriend, especially the first 2 weeks, like I say. Isn't that shiny, Prince Charming, I found my soulmate? Oh, I hate that word. It's this thing of, yes, we're perceiving attractive qualities that, very well might be there. But then there's this huge exaggeration of the attractive qualities, which means we're not seeing what? The warts and the, we're not seeing things in a balanced way at all. And then we're like, I gotta have it to be happy. And as we know, hopefully by now, everybody in this room, because you're not 15, Dependence on anything outside of yourself for your happiness is just a setup for some serious disappointment, isn't it? You know, because it doesn't always work to give you happiness. There's that, it didn't really work. I thought it was going to. Or you lose it, or you never get it in the first place, all of the above. And that's what the Buddha was talking about. So people really resist, dealing with their attachment. Because we're so fooled into thinking our attachment does happiness. And that's a really fundamental wrong view. We struggle. We don't want to give up our attachment because we really think our attachment brings us happiness. Helena.
Isn't that something that's taught, like from a very early age?
Yes.
And, an example is a pacifier for a child, or a rattle to make the child
Absolutely.
quiet, or whatever. It's like teaching that something is outside is going to be. An adult might be trying to do it to pacify the baby so the crying stops, but the baby is learning that this makes it feel good.
Absolutely. And in addition to just that, there are trillions and gazillions of dollars spent. Don't get me started about global capitalism, trying desperately to convince us, right, that it's the things outside of us that will make us happy, because otherwise global capitalism will run to a screeching halt. If everybody lives like me, 2 changes of clothes, no hairbrush, yeah, absolutely. Huge forces. I mean, not only the root ignorance that all beings have, right, that something outside, every being in every culture, that's just kind of universal, not just human beings, other beings too, right? And then on top of that, there's forces desperately. I remember seeing an ad it was like Time magazine, this is many years ago, and it was this couple that we used to in the 80s call yuppies, Remember that word?
Yeah.
They don't use that anymore. No, it's really PI to talk about. Yeah. So anyway, this young, good-looking couple standing in front of the SUV and the skis and the stereo system and the this and the that and the other. And then this ad, I forget what it was even for, said, in order to renounce, first you have to have it all. And I was kind of like, what? It's like incensed. I was like, how dare they? It was like the Zen of automobile ownership or something, some crazy thing. They're actually using the idea of renunciation to sell something. And I was like, that's just wrong. Like, come on. But it's that idea, and you're absolutely right. We're told, we're convinced, and everybody just thinks that it's true. We just all think that it's true, and that is how it relates to that root ignorance. Yes?
I think what encourages us to believe that is that there are things that make us more comfortable.
Yes.
If we have heat.
Well,
winter
absolutely.
or
Yeah.
whatever. And so, we do that every day. We eat to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And there's all psychological studies done. If you ever get an opportunity to watch this movie called Happy, it's a documentary about happiness. And there's so many studies done that say, for sure, when people don't have their basic needs met, they're unhappier, right? So they show a graph between somebody who makes $5,000 a year and somebody who makes $50,000 a year. And yes, there's an increase. After your basic needs are met, the graph flattens out, and income and happiness don't correlate at all. So you're absolutely right. Of course, you need to be warm, you need to have clothes, you need to have food. But once those basic needs are met, but we don't realize that, we just keep thinking there's going to be a correlation, forever between sensory pleasure and experiences and happiness, and it doesn't work out that way. Yeah.
Having grown up quite poor myself, I just met somebody who had his foot in a surgery boot. He had walked into the store where I was working, and when he found out that he had to walk to another mall because he didn't have a car in the snow, this was right after the big snow, and I said, oh, you don't have a car? And I'm thinking to myself, how could he possibly walk that far?
Yeah.
He said, oh, I walk all the time. So I think that when you're used to only having the basics,
Yeah.
you have a different attitude.
That's right, that's right, yeah, the mind is sort of infinitely adjustable to circumstance. I mean, I travel a lot and I see this, and in the movie they show a rickshaw driver in Calcutta living in a slum, and he's like, oh, it's great, my family and friends are around me, and yeah, the wind kind of comes through my tar paper shack in the wind, but it's all right. We all just kind of huddle up together. It's really, happiness is so mental. You know, it's really mental. It's just, I mean, and that's one of the basic teachings of Buddhism, is our happiness is not dependent on externals. In fact, in Tibetan, and I'm going to say this and then give you guys a break, because, you know, I'll never stop, and you really do need to go make a cup of tea. In Tibetan, there isn't a word that completely corresponds to the word Buddhist. The English explorers actually invented the word Buddhist, but somebody who's following the Buddhist tradition in Tibet, who's following those teachings, the word in Tibetan is Nangpa, and it literally translates as inner being. And I love that, right? Because it points to the fact somebody looking within for happiness instead of outside. And that's such a key, you know, after your basic needs are met, which mostly is pretty easy, actually, you know, and you can live very simply. It's all about your mind. And Lord Buddha said this in so many sutras. In fact, he just said the mind creates reality, and it's really true, you know, because our so much more from our mental state than it does. But we're fooled. We're completely fooled. And so that's why Pema Chodron, the well-known Buddhist nun who's written so many great books, she goes, I have had so many people come to me and ask me for antidotes for their anger. Never once has someone approached me and said, could you please give me an antidote for attachment? Because we're still fooled. You know, even when we know this theoretically, we're like, no, I don't want to get out. It means I'm giving up my happiness. So that's one thing we really have to analyze in terms of our own experience. I have people sometimes when, you know, I've only got you guys for a weekend. We could do so much more. Sometimes when I have a class I'm doing over, you know, 6 weeks or 8 weeks, I have people keep a journal. When you feel a subjective feeling of happiness, whip out your little spiral notebook. What just happened? You check yourself with your own experience. And it's amazing. What usually comes up is, you know, some experience of mindfulness. That's often it, where, you know, oh, I was washing the dishes and I was thinking about the past and the future, and then suddenly in the moment, you know, the sunbeam came through the kitchen window, and all of a sudden I was like in the moment, and it just felt good. You don't have to be doing anything extreme. Just having your attention in the present moment feels good. I have this theory about extreme sports. And I think that that's why people enjoy them, because you have to be in the moment. When you're hanging by your fingernails from the face of the rock cliff, you can't be thinking about the past or the future. You've got to be right there. There are much safer ways to be in the moment. And helping someone. Those are the two things that always come up. I even once, this is in Santa Cruz, California, which is where I've lived for a number of years. It's sort of home base for me, which is sort of this hippie surfer college town. Like, that's how I characterize it. And so there's all of these like Waldorf schools and, you know, Montessori schools and stuff. So the Waldorf school called me in, you know, somebody heard about this Buddhist nun, called me in to talk to the 7th grade class because the boys were being mean to the girls. Well, excuse me, I kind of think it's a 13-year-old boy's job description to be mean to the girls. Only in Santa Cruz would they need a Buddhist nun to deal with this. And I'm like, you guys, get real. Okay, I'll go in. So I'm trying to talk to them about compassion. That was sort of my little, you know, agenda for the day. And I had them meditate. Since they were 13, it only was about a 7-minute meditation. But I said, think about the times in your life that you were happy. You know, sit and reflect. What were the happiest times? And it's interesting, I didn't prompt them at all. This is a group of like 22, 13-year-olds. Every single one, I had them go around. It was those two things for them too. It was not about getting the latest video game or the iPad or whatever. It was like, oh, when my older brother comes home from college for Christmas and we're all together again, or when I help my little sister with her homework, or when me and my friends are together and we're having a good time. It was all about connection. It was all about, harmonious connection, helping others. It even shocked me, and I even knew the right answer, and I was like, wow, that's amazing, right? So I think all we need to do is really check with our experience. Don't believe advertising, don't believe global capitalism. Forget it. It's not true. It's just a big fat lie with trillions of dollars behind it. Check your own experience, and then you'll be on the track leading to happiness, right? All right, let's take a break. See, I'm all fired up now. Let's take till 11:30. Is 14 minutes enough to get a cup of tea and take care of business? Then let's come back at 11:30. I just want to finish this. And then this is the aspect that we're going to be delving into in more detail. I just kind of wanted to show you how the whole thing relates to the Four Noble Truths. So about 14-minute break. Come back at 11:30. Thank you. ear hustle. Well, there's no danger of anybody falling asleep in here today. So cool that it's keep everybody awake.
Someone was, well, we were gonna hit it up and someone else, so it should be warmer.
A little bit warmer. No, I'm all right. Thank you. And then, so that was attachment. Aversion has a very similar definition, sort of the opposite, but very similar. So we're perceiving an object as unattractive, exaggerating the unattractive qualities, right? So it's that same exaggeration that relates to that ignorance of just distorting that perception, and then thinking that by being separated from that object, we're going to be happy, right? So same thing, we can't always control not only what we get, but what we are separated from. And then, as I said, there's a list of 26 mental afflictions that all relate to this trio of ignorance, attachment, and aversion. There's a whole family of aversion mental afflictions. Belligerence is in there, resentment is in there, anger is in there. There's some relating to attachment, some that are a combination of all three. Jealousy is in there, pride is in there, considered a mental affliction. So it is kind of interesting to look at that list and to see how many feel like disturbing emotions. Some of them aren't actually emotions. Like ignorance isn't an emotion, right? But it is a mental affliction. It disturbs our peace of mind. It interferes with our, that distorted perception, right? Leads to a lot of other mental afflictions. So there isn't a complete correlation between the idea of disturbing emotion and mental affliction. There is a fair amount of overlap. But this is more coming from that distorted perception, that difference between the way things appear and the way they exist. And then these can act as a motivation for karmic actions. Negative karmic actions, I left out the negative, or ones that will lead to an unpleasant outcome, because the mental afflictions can lead to non-virtuous actions of body, speech, or mind. We're going to look at the 10 non-virtues, which is kind of a basic list of, doesn't cover everything that's considered non-virtuous in Buddhism, but is a pretty good sort of a list. So these would be actions: killing, stealing, lying, divisive speech, things like this, motivated by those mental afflictions, and then lead to suffering results, right? So this is the chain of causation, and Buddhism says any unwanted, unpleasant experience that you have, it's not like 50% is caused and 50% is random. It's all caused. It's all a result of this chain reaction, right? So it's not like, oh, I can deal with some of it, but some of it I'm just going to have to put up with, right? So the truth of the cessation of suffering in Buddhism is very simple. It says, look at this. There's a chain of causation. Anything that's caused can cease once you remove the causes. You can cut through and you won't have to experience this, because 100% of our unwanted experiences are caused. Therefore, the truth of the cessation says just quit creating the causes. And then in terms of the path, and I think it's really interesting to look at all of our Buddhist practices in terms of this diagram. In terms of the path, every aspect of our practice short circuits this chain reaction somewhere, right? So we have a lot of teachings about ethical conduct in Buddhism, right? We've got avoid the 10 non-virtues. We've got the 5 lay vows in Buddhism, avoiding killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct. Intoxicants, which reduce our heedfulness and can allow us to engage, heedlessly in all those other ones. So all of this is saying, okay, subdue this, right? Your mind still might be totally out of control, but please, at least don't act on it, right? So if we don't create the karmic action, no suffering result. We've short-circuited it there. And then there's lots of meditation techniques for dealing with our mental afflictions. We meditate on patience and loving kindness as an antidote for anger. We meditate on impermanence and all kinds of things as an antidote for attachment, antidotes to jealousy, and so forth. So lots of meditation techniques directly targeting this level. And then lots of techniques for actually developing our wisdom so that we get that, what we call a direct realization of the ultimate nature of reality, okay? So in terms of causation, it goes in this direction, but actually in terms of our practice, it kind of goes backwards. It's easier to subdue our actions than it is to subdue our minds. I think we'll all agree with that. We used to be really mad, but you're not popping off and punching somebody in the nose, you know. Then this wisdom, that takes a lot of very focused meditation to actually eliminate that root ignorance altogether. We'll talk about that more, what that means. So I think often in terms of our practice, we work backwards, but every step influences the next one in this sort of backwards chain reaction. And there's one presentation in Buddhism, we talk about the 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And that kind of relates to these 3 steps. And we say that with a very ethical life, right, that's the kind of the foundation. With ethics, you can meditate really well, right? Hard to meditate well. I'm a survivor of this attempt when your actions are totally out of control, right? You have all kinds of things you're regretting, you're hurting people, you're engaging in negative actions. Yeah, right. Try and sit down on the cushion and meditate well. See how that works out for you, right? So by subduing our negative actions, it enables us to develop this deep concentration, right? That's what we actually need in order to get those insights that are the antidote to that ignorance about the nature of reality. We say, in order to actually get a direct perception of the ultimate nature of reality, excuse me, we need perfect single-pointed concentration. As you need that sort of laser beam of mind developed. So I think in practice, and I've worked with this in my own practice, for example, in terms of karmic actions, one of the things I had to work with a lot is negative speech karma. I think for a lot of us it's that. We're not robbing banks and hitting little old ladies over the head and stealing their purses. But sometimes our mouth can be pretty out of control, can't it? So for myself, I'd kind of grown up with a habit of a lot of sort of divisive speech karma, talking about people behind their back. It was the way me and my friends thought we were being witty and funny, is sort of dissing people behind their back. And then I got involved in Buddhism and I just had this really bad habit of doing this. And so at a certain point I said, I really need to get control of this bad habit. And so I made this deal with myself that if I said something really nasty about somebody, I would immediately say something nice about them in the same sentence. So I'm saying these really weird schizophrenic sentences like, oh, that guy is such a jerk, and he's so devoted to Lama Zopa, and all my friends are like, what are you talking about, you know? So I worked with this chain reaction at this level, and for one, it was so embarrassing and kind of weird to be doing this, that then before I spoke, I'd still have the thought, oh, that guy's a jerk. But at least it wouldn't come out. But I noticed the more I trained into kind of forcing myself, and it was very effortful in the beginning, to say something positive, I actually started thinking in more positive terms about people, right? So it sort of influences backwards. So work with your actions, and even if it feels completely contrived and deliberate and effortful, it actually has this interesting kind of feedback loop effect onto your mind, you know, your mental state, and your mind becomes more subdued. Then your meditations are a whole lot deeper and better, and you're able to do those deep meditations on the ultimate nature of reality. So it's kind of interesting. Think about all of our Buddhist practices in terms of how do they remove one of these three? And I don't think there's anything that we do that isn't aimed at, you know, removing the causes of suffering, right? Because that's what it's all about. Because any one of these is missing, there's no way you're going to get down here. It's impossible. And like I said, it's not like 50% is random and 50% is karma, you know? So it's all caused. It's all caused. So questions about this. Isn't this cool? It's cool, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for a while, so I think I have this attachment to like instant gratification, and it bothered me.
Sorry.
It bothered me a little bit when you said, you know, the guy in the hanging on the cliff, because I pictured him being gratified at his ability to hang on that cliff.
Well, my point is, and this is just because, like, I've never done an extreme sport in my life. Like, why do that when you can be sitting in a comfortable armchair with a cup of hot chocolate and, like, Harry Potter? You know, why be hanging off? I mean, that's just my approach to life. But I'm just saying, not having done that, but I think part of the kind of pleasant experience that people have with that is it forces them to be in the moment. That was my point. Yeah. I know that there's another aspect of
kind of manifests itself in lack of motivation to do things sometimes, because I don't get that instant gratification.
Right.
At work, like long-term projects, it's hard to start them because you don't get a lot of motivation.
Right.
Or you don't get a lot of feedback right away.
Yeah. And we have to kind of, and that's, I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up, because also for the Buddhist path, often we do these practices and it doesn't really feel like we're having a whole lot of success or change or whatever. And for that, I think the more of an understanding that we have of why we're doing it and kind of the progression and how it will kind of lead us to the result we want. Because otherwise it's really hard to stay in it. Because as we know, you know, meditation is not always blissful by any means. You're sitting there looking at your mind, and sometimes it ain't pretty what you're seeing, and you really have to kind of believe in what you're doing. And that's why I think the more of an understanding we have of the path in this really logical way, then we'll be convinced, you know, more to do it. You're not just doing something because Lama Zopa told you to and you don't understand why, because then your motivation will kind of run out. But if you really see how it relates to the path, even though you don't have that instant feedback.
Harder, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And quite frankly, you know, in order to put the energy in to develop the concentration that you need to actually get that direct realization of emptiness. They say, one of my friends that's a teacher, there's this sort of 10,000 hour rule for people who are like virtuoso concert pianists and things. There have been studies done, and no matter what it is, there's this thing, if you practice for 10,000 hours, there's this huge difference, like somebody who can teach piano to 10th graders and somebody who can be like in a symphony, and it's directly related to how much practice. And so I have a friend who's a Buddhist teacher, and he says it's that amount of practice that's needed, the virtuoso level, to actually have a direct realization of the ultimate nature of reality. So how many people are actually going to practice to that virtuoso level? But at the very least, we can begin, right? We can begin looking at things differently. We can begin eliminating the causes of suffering, but to have the conviction, the stamina, the training to do that. Very small percentage, quite honestly, of Buddhist students are actually going to go to that level of practice. And still, in the meantime, and the path itself can be joyful, right? So it's not like we're just kind of practicing and nothing's changing. Every little step that we make does make a difference. But yeah, you're right. I mean, at this level of really removing that, I'm not going to fool you. It's not easy. And it's not going to happen next Tuesday. And it's going to take a whole lot of work. It's not this sort of new age, instant, solution to all your problems thing at all. It takes a lot of work.
But that's where the karma comes in, because you want to plant the seeds, at least in this life,
Well, that's
and
right.
in future life.
That's
You can-
right. Yeah.
Well, it's just realizing that I have to plant this, that there is that gap in time between planting.
Absolutely.
That helps me a little bit.
Yeah,
to
good.
put it that way.
And I think we need to have the perspective, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says. There's a story of Milarepa. Elena just read the biography of Milarepa. There's this famous story that's so inspirational of basically a mass murderer who attained enlightenment in one lifetime. For most of us, it's not really going to be that we're going to complete the path in one lifetime. And for most of us who grow up with kind of a Western mindset, we have this distorted thing of like whatever we're going to accomplish is going to happen in this lifetime. And we need to get over that. The Tibetans that I talk to, they're like, you guys are so sort of driven and anxious and discouraged all at the same time because you're only thinking about the 20, 30, 40 years that you have in this life. So there's this like, but. And they're like, come on, chillax. You've got many lifetimes to complete the path. And I think if we have that perspective, it's like the tortoise and the hare thing, right? In Tibet they have that. It's the louse and the flea. Same story, but it's a louse and a flea. Exactly the same thing. They're like, keep on with it, because trust that those imprints will go to the next life. Whatever imprints from this life, even if you don't manage high realizations, but they're not lost. They're not lost. We say that those karmic imprints are never lost. They have ripened into you all being in this room in Medford, Massachusetts, in the middle of a snow. I mean, come on, it's weird, right? I mean, who in this room grew up in a Buddhist country? You're from Malaysia, but there's a lot of different religions going on. No, maybe nobody else in the room even grew up in a country where Buddhism was even... I remember when I was growing up, when I first started reading about Buddhism in the early 70s, there were like 4 really bad translations by Edward Kanzi, full of words like sin. You couldn't figure out head or tail about the path, but I was desperately reading. Everybody in this room has imprints from a past life to be in this room right now. Absolutely guaranteed. I don't have clairvoyance and know what your past life is. The fact that you're here in this room right now shows that in a past life you already had a connection. You wouldn't be here otherwise. So every single instant you spend in this room, remember that 364 per finger snap. Man, you are loading your mind this weekend. 365 times 1 times 60 times 60 times 7 times 2. I don't know what that is. There's a lot of zeros behind that number. And you can trust in that. You can trust in that. Lama Yeshe, our kind of the founder of our tradition, my friend Venerable Ravina said, her favorite kind of saying of Lama Yeshe used to say, karma takes care, dear. Karma takes care, dear. Takes care. Takes care.
I like to share with the group something of
auspiciousness, shall we say, of being here today for myself. I like the principle that you offer today. about the nature of inner beingness. I was faced with a challenge of working today, which was necessary and essential for being here. So trusting, which is a major step of the path without the energy of non-discrimination. I had a dream all night with you and with a group of people. So I was awake at 4:20 in the morning, wide awake, very vibrant, extremely wondering if clients were going to call in the morning so I can rearrange my schedule to be here in this time, the fraction of time and space to create for myself, the true self, the self with the self. So I moved the energy very early morning from 4:20 on, and I trust the nature of my dream, of the vision that I received with you during the whole night. And you were crossing with a lot of people, and you were putting different food and drinks under the seat. So I said to myself, this is a journey, they call it Buddhism, but isn't it a space? And that's what brought me here.
Wow.
And then you shared something profound of my love in life of the planet, of New Zealand. And when I was in New Zealand, the experience of being in New Zealand opened fully the fulfillment of the beauty, the great beauty beyond suffering, of what you call, I wrote it here, mappa, mappa, the mappa, the inner beingness,
Nampa.
Nampa.
N-A-N-G-P-A.
Nampa.
Yeah, N-A-N-G-P-A is usually, yeah.
So as what, there is this dimension, we think we are in charge. Because the conflict for me was, I need to work, I really do. And so to be here, I was able to do many things this morning and organize properly to launch this moment differently. So the timing, the question I have is about timing. I think I heard the word gap, but isn't it the pulsation of the natural momentum in us, in our heart, that guided me here? I have to trust that the heart guided me here, that pulsation, because there were so many dynamics to really organize properly.
Right, so that was kind of a motivating force, but even the fact that you had that intention, that you felt that connection, that all of that took place, I think is also a result of the past connection and ripening in your experience last night that then further motivated you to take care of the conditions so that you could be here today, right? So that was like you were dealing with the conditions that would enable you to be here today. But we'll talk more about that kind of relationship between the causes and the conditions and kind of how that functions. But, you know, when I was saying, I remember many years ago, I was at a practice with this Lama that had been organized like very much last minute. Lama Zopa wanted this High Lama Rinpoche to do a puja obstacle to the water source in the center in California where I was living. This is the days before email. So we had to call people up on Saturday night to see if they wanted to come the next morning at 10 o'clock for this practice. There was another teaching going on the same weekend. So 12 kind of random people showed up. And I remember before Rinpoche started the puja, he looks around and goes, might seem kind of very random, who's sitting here in this room right now for this hour-long practice. He said, we've created specific causes in past lives together to be here in this room right now. And I've never forgotten that, you know? So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like everybody who's in this room, there's a reason that you're here in terms of a cause that you created, not only this morning at 4:30, that was a result of another cause that was created that motivated you to deal with this circumstance. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's very beautiful experience, yeah. Any other questions about this flowchart? Yes?
At the beginning of the talk, you said something like, once your karma ripens, there's pretty much nothing you can do about it. And then you're saying that you can short circuit
Yes.
karma. The question is, like, if you're having if your karma is ripening, say, and someone punches you in the nose, out of seemingly randomly, like, they have anger towards you, and you're not quite sure why. And okay, you can say, okay, this is my past karma ripening. Okay, I can get that, but then you can feel the anger rising. Because it seems very random and you feel like unjustified. So can you, obviously, if you react in a negative way, you're going to deepen the karma or actually set another karma.
Set another cycle.
And then, but are there, so really, what you're saying in the second half is that you can take the wisdom of understanding that you have some control over how you set the next karmic patterns in motion.
Yes, and when we look at the 12 links, that's exactly what we're going to look at. How do we short circuit that chain reaction that just keeps going? And you've nailed exactly how we do. By our understanding, even our wisdom now, even without deep understanding, but just understanding cause and effect, when something like that happens, you go, if I punch him back, I've just created future lifetimes filled with people punching me in the nose. I better just try not to react and act out, then at least I've cut it here. You might still be angry, then you can kind of work with that in your meditation, but at least don't take action to retaliate. And one of the ways that we can do that is thinking, it might seem random, but nothing is. There's not like 50% random and 50% karma. Not to mean you deserve to be punched in the face and it's your fault and you're being punished because in a past life you punched somebody else in the face, but just a cause was created for that experience. And to not perpetuate it, just don't retaliate. That's the thing. But we'll look at that in more detail. We'll also look at purification practices. Because we say there's 3 ways of approaching karma in our practice. Create as much virtuous karma as you possibly can. Avoid non-virtue by not retaliating. And purify whatever seeds have already been created. We can do that. So we're going to look at that too.
So does the purification kind of like let's say karma is on a dimmer switch or something, does that lessen the karma, ripening of negative karma?
Yeah, it can either lessen it or it can eliminate you ever having to experience that specific karma. If your purification is power, I always think of it as defusing a bomb. Like the bomb is there with the fuse, purification gets rid of the fuse. The bomb's still there, but there's no way it's going to detonate, right? That's what purification does. Or it might lessen, depending on how powerful the purification. It may be a stub toe rather than, death. So sometimes it's
instead of a bomb, it'd be a firecracker.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Right. So sometimes, but we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about purification and how karma ripens. Yeah, one more question.
Is there direct experience of this purification, karma? Is there knowing? Can you directly experience it, that there are results to this, not just something that's done?
Yeah.
On faith?
And that's one of the things, like knowing exactly which karma has been purified, right? Like, so which karmic seed is in your mind stream that would have led to which result? They say only an omniscient being can actually get that. I think what we often experience in our practice is just a general shift in our experience. Like I've had that when I've engaged in very intense purification practices, for example, in retreats. I come out and there's sometimes just this extreme kind of shift in the kind of experiences that I have, right? That correlate to whatever purification practice. So it gives me faith in that. And it's not just me sort of making it up. I really do notice, wow, that experience that I used to have a lot of, it's just kind of not happening anymore. You know, I don't have that. And when we look at the karma quiz, we'll look at how we can target our purification for specific karmas. And people that have been working on it for a while, many students I've been working with notice, wow, that unwanted experience that was just always happening in my life, and I really targeted that and really sincerely worked on purifying that, it's just not happening anymore. You know, a lot of my students have done this karma quiz every couple of years, over many years, and they come up to me so happily going, it changed. The results of my karma quiz changed. And I'm like, right on, you're doing your practice well. So that's kind of the evidence for it. But like I said, exactly which cause relates to which results, specifically only a Buddha. They say that's one of the things that's called in Buddhist philosophy a deeply hidden phenomena. Mm-hmm. The exact mechanism of karma in Tibetan is called Tenzin Chogkyi, deeply hidden. It's one of the phenomena that's only kind of directly perceivable by an enlightened being. But the general flavor we can perceive, for sure. Good question. I want to move on. Can I move on? Because we're kind of jumping ahead to some of the things that I'm going to cover. Yes.
My name is
Lisa?
Lisa, yes. I'm not so interested in, well, first off, it seems like all of this is internalized for the individual in terms of karmic action and moving it for oneself. Mm-hmm. That's not my interest. My interest is in karmic action and moving it for not just oneself, but a community, a group of people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm a school teacher, and maybe that's why. So I'm interested in how that works. And we took the kids to see Selma, and there was a point in which Dr. Martin Luther King had stated, okay, we're going to go over the bridge again and cross the bridge. Because initially, when they had crossed the bridge, there were a lot of beatings and killings, and people were hurt. And he wasn't there. He wasn't present. He saw this on television. And then he said, no, we have to do it again. And the second time, there was a unity factor involved where, you know, whites wanted to come in, Jews wanted to come in, Christians wanted to come in, and maybe some Buddhists wanted to come in, I don't know. So they all came and they got together and they were marching. And King, he was at the head, and he decided at some point, maybe 600 feet or more in front of the troops, to stop. And he stopped and he paused and he knelt down and he prayed, and everyone else did also. And then he got up and he turned around and he walked away in the other direction. And he said, something just told me that it wasn't right to do. So that, you know, that whole karmic action that, you know, he decided, you know, after all these people came from thousands of miles, you know, to join in, and he had that whole unity factor, but at that moment he knew that if this action, you know, took place, at least I think he thought he knew, that if this action took place, that something would, it would result in something that he did not want, so call it negative karma or whatever. But, so, my whole point being is that it wasn't for the single person. It was for the group. It was for a community. Actually, it was for a nation. Yeah. So karma, you know, in that sense, you know, and how does it work? That's what I'm interested in.
And I think, you know, again, it always starts with the individual, but hopefully our influence and our motivation and our actions do really spread to influence other people. Because in Buddhism, we say the whole point is to benefit others. But, you know, Dr. King's incredible motivation and holding the line, and he was such a Gandhian, you know, with the peaceful, nonviolent approach. Wow, like that was his individual stance that had this ripple effect that is still influencing people and will probably always will, right? I mean, whenever people talk about who inspires them the most, it's always the short list of Mother Teresa, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and the Dalai Lama. Always show up. Really short list, right? So one person's personal actions can really influence, and that's kind of the point in transforming. You know, sometimes there's a saying something like, we transform the world kind of one mind at a time, right? So I'm kind of talking about the individual, you know, what we can do in our practice that hopefully by our minds transforming will definitely influence others. I mean, it can't help it. It can't help it. Just like the Dalai Lama just shows up and that energy influences people. He doesn't even have to open his mouth. He just sits there and there's this ripple effect. So I don't know if that addresses what you're talking about, but it kind of starts with our own shift that hopefully really will, you know, have a ripple effect. And we may not always, I mean, wouldn't it be great if everybody in this room could end up having the influence of Dr. King and having that incredible heart and that mind? You know, I think in my perspective, he was an awakened being that showed up and manifested in that lifetime, in that aspect, to benefit so many beings, you know, and kind of my Buddhist lens of looking at things. But it starts with the transformation of our own minds, you know, and then the influence comes from that. And I don't know if that addresses what you're talking about, but that's kind of the way that I look at that collective shifts like that. It's sort of like many people coming together with a similar intention, or one person with such a strong example and intention that really influences others. And often it's both, you know, it's all of the above kind of happening. But that's really what we're talking about. We're not just talking about cleaning up our own experience. We're really talking about changing the world, you know, because we have to. We have to. It's not good enough to just be free of suffering ourselves. We really absolutely have to engage for the benefit of all beings. So hopefully what we talk about will address that as well. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, let's look a little bit more. We say there's 4 characteristics of how karma works. Now we're just kind of getting into the mechanisms of karma. Karma is certain, and what this means is there is a qualitative relationship between cause and effect. Meaning, like the example I gave before, you gave the donation to the large nonprofit organization. If you do that with the right motivation, it will lead to a beneficial result, right? A non-virtue will lead to an unpleasant result. So by definition, we say positive karma is that which leads to an experience of short-term happiness, hopefully long-term liberation. Negative karma, by definition, is that which leads to an experience of suffering. So good and bad karma is defined by the result in your experience, right? So karma is definite that way. You cannot do a virtuous action and experience a non-virtuous, you know, a negative outcome from that. Depends a lot on your motivation for doing it, because you can make a big fat donation so that people will think that you're a great philanthropist, and then your motivation for doing that action was not altruistic, right? We'll look at that. We'll look at the components. Yes?
That's basically, you kind of sort of answered my question. If you're giving, let's say you donated to the nonprofit organization, but you did it with the thought that something is going to come back in your direction 1,000-fold.
Yes.
You know, that to me is...
That's right. So you can do something, and we'll look at that, that's the next chart, the different components of a karmic action. The action itself is just one of 4 components, and actually the intention is the most important, right? And conversely, you can do something that doesn't have a beneficial outcome if you did it in out of your own best motivation and wisdom, and it backfired. Still for you, that can be a good karma even though it didn't necessarily have a beneficial result, but depending on your motivation, okay? But in terms of just kind of similarity of type between cause and result, it's sort of incontrovertible, you know? You're not gonna do a positive action and experience a suffering result. There's this correspondence. But then karma magnifies. So from a small action, you can get a big result, especially depending on how long that lag period was between cause and effect, right? So even a very small negative action could have serious consequences in terms of your experience if it's unpurified over a long period of time, and even the smallest virtuous action that you do. So we shouldn't think that any opportunity to do something beneficial, oh, it's not a big deal, forget about it. Every tiny positive thing that we do also magnifies into a beneficial outcome, okay? Yes?
How does it magnify?
Well, you know, I think I've discussed this with many people in terms of kind of what is the mechanism of that. We say that those karmic imprints are carried in our mind stream. Our mind stream is composed of moments of consciousness, right? So to use maybe kind of a crude metaphor, it's sort of like every moment of mind is sort of passing the baton of those karmic imprints to the next moment of mind. So every time it's passed to the next moment of mind, it's like that groove gets deeper, right? So as long as it keeps getting passed and passed and passed, it sort of builds up steam. In a way, it sort of builds up momentum. In talking to different people philosophically, that's sort of the best sort of explanation of the mechanism of how that works.
Actually, that would mean that the oldest karmic
Is the heaviest.
are
That's
very
right.
most-
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why you can experience a result in your lifetime that seems big, and you're like, what did I do? Exactly. And it could have been a tiny, tiny seed. But the good news is that works for the good stuff too.
Right.
You know, it works for both. And all these laws apply both. I mean, we're focusing now more on the negative just because we're talking about the truth of suffering, right? And how to get rid of that. But these laws apply to the positive. But that's kind of the mechanism. The longer it keeps being transmitted, it's almost like the DNA keeps replicating, you know, more and more. Again, to use these metaphors to kind of explain the mechanism of that, okay?
Got it.
We won't experience a result if we haven't created the cause. So this is the one that says, what we experience is not random. No action, no result. Also true for the good stuff, right? You're not gonna get the high realizations of the path just by wishing. You need to create the cause. Remember that thing from a couple of years ago, The Secret? Remember that thing? There was some book that said, it reminded me of affirmations we used to do in the 80s where you'd put the Post-it on your mirror and wish for things. In Buddhism, we say, yeah, the intention is important, but you got to back it up with an action. That's only the first step. So The Secret thing, and I dissed it, and I've never actually read the book. Somebody gave it to me, and I'm like, thanks. But this idea that just sitting around wishing things to happen in your life, like I said, that's the first step, and it's important to set your intention, but you've got to create the cause, or you will not experience the result. Okay, so that discounts the idea that half of it is just sort of random or just sitting around and wishing you're going to get the result that you want. And karma doesn't just disappear. doesn't burn off like the morning fog. And the more you ignore it and the longer it's been, actually it gets more powerful, right? So the only options we have, once a karmic seed has been planted, once a karmic seed has been created, is experience the result eventually when the right conditions come together, or purify it before you experience it. Only two options once that karma has been created. Through certain practices, you can defuse that bomb so that bomb will never go off, never detonate, right? Or experience it. Those are the only two options. It doesn't just disappear. It's carried from life to life. So even in the next life, you're not conscious of creating the cause. You will still experience the result. So it's not something you need to remember, right? It's not mental in that way, that in order to experience the result, you need to know what you did. It's this energy, this imprint in your mind, you know, that's there. Once you've created it fully, there it is. And it will not just disappear. Okay, so those are the 4 characteristics. Any questions about these to Claire?
If you look back close enough, you can get relatively near the source of the beginning of the sequence.
What do you mean? Say more. I'm not quite sure.
If the result is unambiguous because it's occurred, but if you examine the basis for its chain, you can go back to its rudimentary, closer to its rudimentary origin.
Well, we can figure it out according to the correlations. We may not, though, feel that we've created the cause for that experience in this life, because we say karma is carried from life to life, and some of the things we're experiencing, in fact, most of what we're experiencing in this life was created in past lives. Usually the gap is that long, right? So we don't always know why we're having the experiences that we're having. They say that there are ways that that lag period can be shortened. If the karma is very powerful, then we can experience it sooner after having created the cause. But for the most part, a lot of what the experiences that we're having have actually been created in past lives. So we don't specifically know. You know, we just can see through the correlations. Yeah, did you have a question? Yeah.
I mean, it would make sense that, like, if it was too close, like, everyone would be enlightened rather quickly. Right? Like, I mean, if you touch it and it hurts, you learn, like, don't touch that anymore.
Exactly. Like I say, it's that pesky lag period that makes us not believe in cause and effect. I had a friend who was a Buddhist teacher in New York. And you get this thing when you're a Buddhist teacher that people ask you to give them the papal dispensation to create non-virtue, right? And so since he was teaching in New York, everyone would ask for permission to kill the cockroaches in their apartment. You know, and they go like, I really have to kill the cockroach. And his response to that I thought was brilliant. And he would say, if when you're going to smash the cockroach, your own ribs start to break, you would not ask me that question. Because you're absolutely right. If we really experienced cause and effect that simultaneously, or even saw that, boy, would we ever straighten up our act. Big time, wouldn't we? It really is that we can't have that direct experience. I think that we are so ignorant about cause and effect. Or you learn it, but you're like, oh, nobody's looking. I'll just, Mr. Karma isn't looking today. I'll just do it. And that's another really important thing about karma, is nobody's keeping track. It's an imprint in your own mind. Because a lot of people, when they start studying karma in Buddhism, they have this reactive thing about their religion of origin going, oh, I don't want to be judged by somebody else. Well, it's not like that with karma at all. You're keeping that imprint in the privacy of your own mind stream. So if nobody is looking, that imprint will still be there. You know, it's not about being punished. It's not about being judged, and we kind of have that a lot, right? The people who grew up in like Judeo-Christian culture, we have that sort of, oh, no, I don't want the judgment. But there's no judge in Buddhism. You know, we're creating our own experience through our actions. That's all. You know, and it's not about, oh, we're being punished for being bad and hurting someone. It's just because of that, we are going to experience some sort of reciprocal experience. Okay, so this is kind of the way karma works. Any other questions? Yes.
What happens to that karma, that's the diffused bomb? I mean, because I assume Lama Zopa has done a lot of purification pujas, but he's still Lama Zopa. You know, I mean, is it really?
Well, we say until the point where you're completely liberated, which means you're no longer under the sway at all of karma and delusion. You know, at a very, very high level of realization, all of your karmic bombs have been diffused, but that's a very high level. So some people say, oh, a Tibetan Lama got in a car accident. Why did that happen? Well, you can even be at a very high level and still have your old negative karma ripening, for sure. You know, for sure, for a very long time. So even at the point where there's a level of realization I'll talk about more tomorrow when I talk about emptiness, where you've had a direct realization of the ultimate nature of reality. You're not enlightened yet, you're not liberated yet, but one of the really cool things about that is you can no longer from that point on create any more new negative karma. Impossible. That's amazing. However, you still have the old stuff that may not be completely purified. So it doesn't mean from that point onward you're never going to have any new unwanted experiences, right? But you're no longer going to produce new. So it kind of happens in stages, right? So it happens in stages. So you can't just say, oh, this teacher is amazing. How come this thing happened? Well, you know, unless they're at a very, very high level. And then we say they could be manifesting something to teach you a lesson too. Like, is it their karma ripening, or are they just, I mean, that's a whole nother level of, are they just manifesting, you know, a certain thing to teach you a lesson? That's another possibility for why something seems to be happening to them. Yeah, yeah, but it's a long, you know, like I said, all of those old karmic seeds takes a tremendous amount of purification before they're all totally diffused, you know. Even after the point where you're no longer creating any new ones, still you've got the old stuff that might still be ripening, and it might be diffused so that it's ripening as a stub toe rather than a death of that life, you know, and that happens too. Okay, let's start the next page, and then I'll give you your well-deserved lunch break. You're probably having your low blood sugar crisis. But a couple more pages on kind of the mechanisms of karma. So we say that there's 4 components of a complete karmic action, okay? So let's use, not to be gross or anything, but it's just kind of, let's use a killing karma example, not to freak you out, but just because it's easy to see these 4 components. So let's say where I am, I live in Canada, there's lots of hunters. So let's say that the hunter is out the deer and actually shoots a deer. Let's use that as an example. Again, don't mean to be gross, but it's just obvious to see the 4 components. So we say, for that karmic action, there need to be a basis or an object. In that case, it's the deer. The object of that action is the deer, okay? The thought, and this has 3 parts: the will or intention. And that was Helena's question. That's super important, right? So that hunter has the intention. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I'm going to go out and shoot me a deer. I mean, I can't relate to this at all. Why would that be fun? But anyway, we won't go there. So that intention to do that action. The recognition, right? So the hunter's lifting up the gun, recognizing that's the deer that I'm intending to shoot, right? And then some sort of obscuring affliction, right? Ignorance, aversion, or attachment. Now for killing, it could be any one. You can have a crime of passion where attachment is your main motivation. For a hunter killing a deer, we would say, according to Buddhism, it would be the basic ignorance that says killing is no big deal. Like I can just go out and shoot a deer and it's okay, right? It could be even that. You know, the hunter could be motivated by wanting to feed their family, right? There could be any number, or if it's sport, let's say it's just a sport thing. We would say in Buddhism, it's the ignorance that says killing is not a negative thing to do. I can, you know, I'm a human being, that's a deer, it's up, you know, I can just take the life of this animal, it's not, you know, important at all. I can just do that. So that would be the obscuring affliction. The action would be killing. Now for killing karma, you can get someone else to do it for you, you get the hit. Right? So even if you ask someone to do it, which has huge implications for like an army general giving an order, right? Ooh. So for many karmic actions, getting someone else to do it for you counts as the full action, right? So doing the action, then the completion of the deed, in this case the deer does die, it's not just wounded, it dies. And then the satisfaction, and that means the hunter says, oh, you know, it doesn't need to be he throws a party and rejoices, but he just has some sense of that's what I intended to do, I did it, I pulled it off, killed the deer, right? So if all four of these components are complete, that hunter will get the complete result of a killing karma, and we'll talk about what those results are. If any one of these components are missing, that person will not get the complete result for a killing karma. So now the question, can you think of an example of a killing, you know, that all four are not complete? What would be an example?
You walk and you step on an ant.
Exactly. All right, so let's break that down. You're walking along and you step on an ant without even seeing it. So, what about the basis, the object? It's still there.
It's still
The
there.
ants, there's an object. So the thought, did you have the intention to kill?
No.
Did you even see it?
No.
So, was there any obscuring? All of this is missing completely, and this is huge, right? The action,
Yeah,
you step on the ant. Completion, but no, you had no satisfaction. I did this in front of Lama Zopa, by the way, with a snail in California that made a big crunch. I'm walking next to Lama Zopa. We'd just taken the daily vow, including the vow not to kill, fresh in my mind stream. I've just taken the vow 2 seconds ago. We walk out, and it's rainy at night in California, and I go crunch. So exactly like that. Yes, Tenzin Chogkyi. I wasn't a nun then, so maybe less karma. So stepped on the snail. Not only was none of this, I was horrified and embarrassed and humiliated. You know, the moment you want the earth to open up and swallow you. So for me, that was not at all a complete killing karma, right? So there are plenty of examples of that. Now, what if the hunter wounded the deer, right? Everything would be there except the completion of the deed. Even with that, it wouldn't be the full impact as if... Now, the scriptures say, if you have a moment of regret during the continuum of the deed, you don't get the full effect. So let's say the hunter lifts the gun, pulls the trigger before the bullet's out of the end of the gun. He regrets what he did. It attenuates, it lightens that because there's regret. there. So I think we can think of plenty of examples where it's not a full killing karma, because sometimes if we haven't studied in depth, we look at the vow not to kill and you're like, it's impossible. When I drive, there's bugs on the windshield. If I'm going to be a Buddhist, does that mean I can't walk on the grass, drive a car, right? It's not that extreme. And this is really a big deal. Did we intend to do that act or not? Yeah.
In similar fashion, you said the person who kills the animal so that they'll have food for their family.
Yeah.
And then so like that intention of like, yeah, I want to do this, but the idea of the regret of I don't want to kill the animal, but I do want to feed my family.
Yeah.
And
we'll look too, there's another list that we'll do after lunch of different factors that make the karma heavier or lighter, and sort of the nature of the intention. Not only is your intention there, but what is your intention, right? So like, for example, for killing, the heaviest killing karma would be a premeditated, sadistic, right? Where your intention is to cause the most amount of suffering and you get off on it. That would be like, so if you had the thing of like, I hate that I have to do this, but my family needs to be fed, blah, 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 that would be much lighter. So there's so many different levels, even if all four are complete, of the intensity of the components kind of thing makes a big difference. But I think, understanding this too, because remember what I said, this applies to virtue too. So get the most bang out of your buck for your virtue, pick the heaviest object, the weightiest object, have the strongest intention, think about your motivation before you do something virtuous, have the recognition there, right? Do the action as in a focused, mindful way, and then rejoice about it, right? Anybody who's a student of Lama Zopa, rejoicing over your virtue is a really big deal. That's this one. So all of it's true for virtue too. We say even for our virtues, as long as we're still not at a very high level of realization, there's still that misperception of reality. So we don't have a pure virtue even until a very high level of realization. But we kind of have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, right? You have to engage in virtuous actions, even if they're still mixed with just, I don't see reality the way that it really exists. Okay, so those four components are there for virtuous actions as well. So I think, we don't need to become so paralyzed when we look at the lists of Buddhist ethics of going like, oh my gosh, I can't take these vows. It's impossible. I'll never be able to do it, because the intention is so important, right? So any other questions about these four? Yes?
American Sniper brought up a lot of these questions, like particularly completion of deed, but not necessarily satisfaction, but the necessity to go through with the action. And the will and intention was clear because it was a form of defense, and then there would be the gestalt of national defense versus being attacked again. And then there's the political argument of being in support of the action to begin with. So there's lots of justifications associated with the offensive nature of a defensive killing.
With these, and this sort of goes back to Lisa's point a little bit, is at a certain point, when we're looking at karma, we really have to kind of back up and make it very personal in terms of, are we ourselves going to engage in those actions, right? we might as well just let go of trying to figure out for somebody else what was going on and what was their motivation. It really becomes, I mean, not to say that we're condoning other people's actions, but we can get so strung out on trying to analyze every action that everyone else is doing. This is where we back up and it becomes very personal, knowing these four components. This is about how we're making choices in our own life about what we're doing and what we're supporting too. It's said, and it's funny in terms of the thing of supporting what your country is doing and what your country's action. In the Buddhist scripture, they say if any group of people is engaging in a collective action, everybody in that collective is implicated, right? So you think about a country like the United States getting involved in some war effort. And I've had this conversation with Tibetan lamas, and they say, in order to not be implicated in what your country is doing as a citizen of the country, you have to protest what that action is, right? Because then you're saying, I don't want any part of that. You know, so you mentally, vocally, somehow separate yourself from the group. So if you're complacent and you just go, oh, it's just the way it is, business as usual, politics, whatever, I'm going to pay my taxes, there's nothing I can do, you're implicated, right? So you have to somehow kind of verbalize your non-support. Otherwise, according to that collective karma, right? Because we say a group of people engaging in an action, everybody is implicated. I had a friend who was very, very brave, and I couldn't do what she did. I wasn't brave enough. So I don't want to go to prison. I know that. I teach in prisons. I don't want to be there. Apart from as a teacher, because I get to leave, you know. She, in the 80s, when the U.S. was really involved in Central America, you know, the whole Contras and all of this, she refused to pay her taxes. She wouldn't keep the money. She calculated her tax return, took the money that she would have owed the government, because she knew 95% went to the Department of Defense, and she donated it to her nonprofit organizations that were working for the freedom in Nicaragua. And she wrote a letter to the IRS, submitted her tax return with this letter saying why she was protesting. I thought that was awesome, and I was a chicken. I couldn't do it. She was willing to go to prison for her beliefs and completely protested what the U.S. was involved in. And like I said, I really admired that. You know, so, but backtracking to the sniper question, this is just about, really, it kind of boils down to knowing these. How is this going to influence the choices we make about our own ethical dilemmas, right? We can't really say, oh, this is what it's going to be. And this is very simplified. It's not always so cut and dried as, oh, it's obviously virtue, it's obviously non-virtue. Sometimes some of the components will be there. It's not always easy to figure out. But understanding the principles, right, we can apply them to the ethical dilemmas in our own lives. And it gets complicated sometimes. I teach these courses in death and dying. That's one of the things I do a lot because I've worked a lot in Buddhist hospice. All of these questions like organ donation, life support, wow, it's not, people say, what's the Buddhist view? I go, it's complicated. You know, there is not one. It's just about looking at the factors and trying to make an informed decision.
So like in the death and dying, it's like kind of look at the person's
wishes, and do they want to be kept alive artificially, or just let pass away naturally?
And what's going on with the death process? You know, the more you learn about it from the Buddhist perspective, that changes things. So so it's just about, the principles might seem cut and dried. In the application, often it gets more complicated. But the more clear we are about things like the principles, then we can try to apply them to our own situations. Yeah. And on that note, with It's Complicated, I will release you for a little nutrition. So do you want to say how it works here with the food?
Give us like 15 minutes just to get everything heated up and ready to go. So you'll see us going back and forth with thoughts sometimes. And if you have a dish, just let me know
And then why don't we take a break till 2? Does that give people enough time? So that's like 15 minutes to get everything ready, and then a little more than an hour to eat everything, and then come back at 2 o'clock and we'll carry on. So this afternoon we've got between 2 and 5 scheduled. So we'll have a proper longer tea break halfway through. We'll have about an hour, 15-minute or so session, and then a proper longer break, and then another session. So we'll carry on. A couple more kind of mechanisms of karma to explain. We'll go into the karma quiz where we'll look at the results of karma, and then we'll see if we've got time to start with the 12 links today. If we don't, we'll deal with that then in the morning. Okay, great. Thank you for your attention. See you at 2 o'clock. Bon appetit.